How is the payment? What is the amount of the payment for shame? Meaning, how do you calculate this? So, how do you calculate it? So, the truth is, the Mishnah is not going to really answer how to calculate it, but it's going to talk about part of the calculation. The amount to be paid is going to depend on the person who has brought about the shame and the person who has been shamed, which means depending on the social status of each one, that will make a difference as to how much shame or what level of shame this young woman has gone through. So, for instance, if the mavayish means the person who embarrassed her, that's the violator, the seducer. So the point is that if he is of a higher social status, then her shame is less than if he's on a lower social status. If some kind of low life does it to you, that is more shameful than a more prominent person who does it. And the same thing, if the woman, depending on her social status, if she is from the lower social status, then her shame isn't as much as if such a thing happens to a woman of a higher social status. So that's what the Mishnah means. It depends on the man and the woman. Depends on them. That's going to depend on the level of the shame that you have to pay for. Okay, but exactly how is this paid for? So here on the bottom, in the notes, they say like this, and they cite this from the Rambam. The court estimates how much money the father of a Naira would pay to prevent his daughter from suffering such shame. And this is the amount the criminal must pay. Very interesting way of evaluating. How much would a father pay to avoid this shame? Meaning, if he could catch this guy beforehand and prevent him, how much would he pay to stop him from doing it? And now again, that's all going to depend on, and again, how much would he pay to prevent him from shaming his daughter? So again, depending on the level of shame, what would the amount he would pay? How exactly, you figure out how much he would pay, I'm not sure exactly, but that's what it says. You estimate, somehow or another, you estimate how much money the father would pay to prevent his daughter from suffering such shame. Okay, that's the first part. Next part, pagam. Another payment that was paid is for the damage that is done to the girl. There's a certain, or actually the way they translate it, and that's really the way to make it, to translate it. Pagam here, pagam literally means a blemish. But what the blemish here in this situation means, there's a certain amount of devaluation that happens to this girl. Now, what does it mean, devaluation? What's the, so to speak, the monetary value we're dealing with over here? Now, clearly, this is not a monetary value that defines the essence of the person, but it's a certain level of value that, in some way, is inherent in every person. But again, it's not the typical way that we would necessarily look at how you would put a value on this kind of a thing. But this is how the Mishnah says: Pagam, the devaluation. Rayan oisa kilo hi shivcha nimkeres. We look at her as if she would be a shivcha, she would be a maid servant being sold. How much she would have been worth, how much she is worth. That means like this. We imagine as if this young girl is a Gentile maidservant, okay? And there is someone who is looking to buy a maidservant as a wife for his slave. And if he wants to if he wants to really please the slave, then the wife that he will get for him will be a virgin. So if she were to be a slave and she would be sold in this manner, she would have more value as a virgin than not as a virgin. So it's that difference in value that now is paid by the person who did this to her. Now again, it's not the essence of what she is, because she is not a shivcha, she's not a slave. But this is the way the Mishnah says that payment of pagama, devaluation, the Torah says you pay, this is how you measure it. And then the last part, kanas, the fine that we said, the 50 shekel fine. B'chal adam, that's shava b'chal adam. That's the same by everyone. V'chal sheyesh like kitzva min ha-Torah, and anytime the Torah puts a set amount on a payment, shava l'chal adam, it's the same by everybody. Makes no difference who they are, what their status is, makes no difference. The Torah says if this person either violates her or seduces her, there can be a payment of 50 shkalim. If the Torah says 50 shkalim, it's 50 shkalim across the board. Even though the shame can be different, and even though the shame can be different, but when it comes to the knas, it's all the same. Makes no difference about who the perpetrator is, who the victim is. Once the Torah gives a specific amount, that's it. Makes no difference. And then the Mishnah says, and the same thing applies anywhere where the Torah gives a set amount. So the example that I brought down here in the notes is the following. The Torah imposes several fixed payments of this type, such as the 30 shkalim that must be paid by a person whose ox killed a Canaanite slave. Your ox killed a Canaanite slave. You have to pay 30 shkalim to the master of that slave. The amount is always 30 shkalim, regardless of the slave's value. So even though the slave can be extremely valuable because he's very, 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 very talented, and therefore he himself would go has a very high value, the knas, the fine that's paid for the damage of the ox killing this slave is always going to be the same. It is always going to be 30 shekel. And that's the same thing here. It's always going to be 50 shekel. The knas of 50 shekalim that the Mishnah mentioned is always going to be the same, no matter who the perpetrator is and who the victim is. Okay. Gam ein chilak be'isser rechilas. There is also no difference regarding the prohibition of speaking rechilas. Benim hu margal al Yisrael b'fnei Yisrael, whether he basically reports on a Jew to another Jew as to what that Jew did to him. Uvenim hu margal Yisrael b'fnei Nachrim, or if you tell what a Jew did to non-Jews to them, meaning whether you tell this to Jews about what a Jew did to them, or you tell it to non-Jews what a Jew did to them. The point is that you are, by reporting on this Jew, you are going to be causing him problems. And therefore the prohibition applies in both places. If you actually speak rechilas about a Jew to a non-Jew, that's even worse. If you go ahead and say it to the non-Jew, the chances are that something's going to come, that he's going to do something back to this Jew who said something about it, did something about him, is going to be more probable, and therefore this rechilas you speak is worse, because it's going to bring about more damage to the person. There are many people who stumble in this. They say, a non-Jew tells someone, Moshe sold this to me. And what does the Jew say? Look what he sold you. He sold you rotten stuff. Or let's say he did work. Look, I hired Moshe to fix my steps. And he says, well, look at this and look at that. And people are too quick to do that because at the end of the day, just the nature of things is that by doing that, by speaking that rechilas in front of a non-Jew, the chances that any kind of suffering or damage or even loss of livelihood there's more of a chance of that, and therefore the rechilas you speak in that situation is worse. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Now, a question.